All right. Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Uh, did you hold any jobs before entering the service?
Um, Most of the time I was in school. I worked summers construction, but most of the time before going to the service I was in school.
What primary or and secondary schools or college did you attend?
Actually, I received a scholarship to General Motors Institute out of high school. I went there for one semester, didn't care for it. Transferred to Central Michigan. I was there for one semester, didn't care for that. Then I went to a Macomb County Community College, a small college where I grew up, and finally decided I wasn't ready for college. I was there for all the wrong reasons. So a friend and I decided we'd enlist in the military. So that's how that all started.
What were your parents' feelings about you joining the service?
My dad was all for it. He could tell that I wasn't ready to go to school, that I was just, stumbling and bumbling through life. And he thought the military would be good for me, and it was. It actually was probably what I needed at that point in my life.
Why did you enlist?
Well, a friend and I got this harebrained idea that we were going to join. Actually, we wanted to join the Air Force. And we went to the recruiting center in the little town I grew up in, and the Air Force recruiter was at lunch. So the next recruiter was the Marines. We went there, and he was at lunch. The third one was the Navy, and he wasn't. And 20 minutes later, I was in the United States Navy.
What was your most vivid memory of your time training?
Time in what?
Training?
Well, boot camp's quite an experience. I mean, it's most people have never been exposed to that kind of regimented lifestyle, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. I was with 85 guys, and you live in very cramped quarters, so it's. But all in all, it was a pretty pleasurable experience. I mean,
Do you recall any of your instructors?
55 years ago, not really. The only one I recall, I remember the guy that the recruiter who enlisted me. He was the right guy for the job. He would tell what we got to later to call sea stories about his exploits and the things he had done, and he had the gift of gab. I mean, he was very good. He was the right man for the job as a recruiter, so I remember him vividly.
What was the hardest part of the military lifestyle you had to adapt to?
Being told what to do constantly. I mean, it's pretty regimented, and you get used to it after, a reasonable period of time. At first, it's a little difficult. You're told when to eat and where to go and how to dress and this and that. I mean, it's different from civilian life. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but after a few months, it's your new lifestyle, and you're fine.
And what was the easiest part of military lifestyle?
I guess not having to make too many decisions. It's all where you go and what you do is pretty well scripted by your by whatever command you're in. So you just kind of go with the flow, do your best.
Did you receive any promotions?
I did. You start out I actually went in as a E2 because I had some college credit. I was in 3 years, 8 months, and I got out as an E5. So yeah, it went pretty well.
Which branch did you enter?
I wound up in the United States Navy.
Where did you serve?
Well, I started out, went to boot camp at Great Lakes, Illinois. After that, they have a training. I decided to be a aviation ordnanceman. And the A school for that at that particular time was in Jacksonville, Florida. So I spent 18 weeks down there. And then my first duty station was at a place called Point Magoo. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's down south by Oxnard. It's on the coast. I spent 2 years there. Then I got transferred to a squadron that was headed for Vietnam. And I spent my last 9 months overseas.
What are your recollections of that experience?
Hard work. I worked on a flight deck. We were basically loading bombs, 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day. So, I mean, a lot of hard work. A lot of camaraderie. I mean, it's, you get close to them people. Flight deck's a kind of a fast-paced environment, so you rely on your friends to take care of each other. I mean, it's easy to get hurt up there, so all in all, it was a good experience.
Were you in combat support, or combat service support?
I guess you would call it combat support. I was on an aircraft carrier off the coast for 99% of the time. I flew in a few times into Da Nang, but most of the time I was on the boat.
What kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving?
Well, a lot, actually. My best friend, who has now passed away, I met in the service. I met him in boot camp, and he actually got orders to VA at Attack Squadron 97. I got orders to Attack Squadron 27, and they were sister squadrons, so we always deployed together. So I met him in boot camp, and I was with him till the day we both got discharged, and we became a lifelong friend.
How did you stay in touch with your family and friends?
Well, it's a little different back then. We don't have video conferencing and smartphones, and it was all by mail. When you got a chance, you got a phone, you could make a phone call. But it was a little more difficult. If I called home at noon there, it was 1 o'clock in the morning where I live, so things were a little different then.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Well, probably none I can say on camera, but yeah, when you're with, a bunch of other guys, there's always a bunch of practical jokes and horseplay and, that kind of stuff. It's almost a lifestyle in the military.
Was there ever something you did for good luck?
Not really. I wouldn't consider myself superstitious. Just pay attention, Like I say, the flight deck's kind of a dangerous place, so you gotta pay attention or you get hurt.
What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
At the time, I was into lifting weights. Spent a lot of time in the gym. Traveled as much as I could. It's kind of limited when you got a duty station, but.
Do you recall the day service ended? Oh, the day service, yeah. The day service ended. Where were you when your service ended?
I was in San Diego, California. We got what they called an early out. I was due to get out in August, which would have been my 4-year commitment. And they had some cutbacks. So they processed me when we were headed back from Vietnam. They processed me on the boat. And when I hit what they call CONUS, Continental United States, I was separated. So when the boat pulled into San Diego Harbor, my wife met me there. And when I set foot on the dock, I was out of the service, basically. And yes, I remember it very well.
Did you return home after service?
We did. I was born and raised in Michigan. We went back to Michigan for probably 1 year, my wife and I. And then we come out here basically on vacation. That was in 1971, and I've never been back. So I guess I live here now.
How were you received by your family and community after coming back?
Very well, very well. I mean, it's, everybody's appreciative. Although the country at that time, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment. Vietnam was not a popular war. So we got some of I never personally experienced anything bad. I've heard all the war stories. We got some protesters and stuff in the airports when I was traveling, but most of my friends and family were glad I was home.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
Had no problem at all.
Did you end up going back to work or school?
Went back to work, never did go back to school. Took a job in construction and been in construction for 40 years, until I retired.
How did service change you?
I grew up. I was a very immature 19-year-old when I enlisted. That's why college wasn't right for me at the time, so we decided to enlist in the service, and you get to see a lot of things. You don't realize how good you've got it in this country until you go somewhere else. So it made me thankful for what I took for granted. So.
Did you continue any friendships after service?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, well, it's difficult in the sense that some of them people, they all go their separate ways, you know. Them friends, I had friends from Florida and Alaska and Maine, and you know, so it's hard. It's much easier nowadays with social media, but back then, a few of them I kept in close contact with. And
how did service affect the way you relate to others?
Everybody's got their own cross to bear. I guess when you get exposed to people from so many different walks of life, you understand that some people come from poverty, some people come from, you know, the proverbial silver spoon. You get to see a larger cross section of people, and it's a little easier to relate once you realize that everybody's got a different story. So.
Did you join a veteran organization?
I did briefly. I joined the AMVETS in my hometown with my dad. Didn't care for it, to be honest with you. My friend, gentleman right there, is very involved in the veterans organizations. My personal experience at that time was they all got together, drank beer, and told war stories, which I didn't care for. You know, I wanted to talk girls or sports or anything but war stories. So I now know that's not the case all the time. You know, a lot of the veterans organizations do a lot of good things. So I try to help out a little bit if I can.
Do you attend reunions?
I never have. I'm always planning to go, but I never, somehow life gets in the way, and I never.
Sorry. How did your military services experiences affect your life?
Well, like I said, you get to see a greater cross-section of humanity. Going overseas, I got to see the way other people live that I had only read about. You take for granted in this country that the whole world has clean water and electricity and food, and that's not the case. Vietnam, when I was there, was pretty war-torn, so I mean it wasn't a good example, but the Philippines or places in Japan, they live a very, I guess impoverished would be the right word, lifestyle, and it's been that way for generations and probably will continue for a long time. They don't have a lot of the amenities we have, and they do just fine. They adapt, so you get to see, it opens your eyes, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
What are some life lessons you learned from your military service?
Hard work, I guess, solves a lot of problems. What you lack in education or expertise, excuse me, hard work goes a long way to solve some of them issues. So put your nose to the grindstone and get after it.
What was the best part of your service?
At the time, it would have been the day I got out. I suppose when I got orders to Point Mugu in California, I met my wife. So I'd have to say we've been married 51 years. Got 2 kids, 5 grandkids, 3 great grandkids. So probably that.
How has your military service impacted your feeling about war and the military in general?
Well, I'm a big supporter of the military. I mean, we'd be in deep trouble without them. About war, there's no good wars. I mean, they're a terrible thing. I mean, human nature, there will probably always be war, you know, for various reasons, but it's a horrible thing, but you have to deal with it. It's not going to go away.
Can we go back to your wartime service, if that's okay with you?
Sure.
What type of training or schooling did you have?
I was an aviation ordnanceman. That basically is any of the weapon systems on the planes, Navy planes, guns, rockets, missiles, bombs. That's what we dealt with. So it wasn't real handy for civilian life. So if I either could stay in the service or go to work for a defense contractor, because there's no need to drop bombs at home. So.
What was your first assignment after basic training?
A school. They sent me to aviation ordnance school in Jacksonville, Florida for 18 weeks. Basically, that's where you start learning your trade, your military trade. So I spent 18 weeks in Florida, and then they shipped me off to California.
What message would you like to leave for the future generations who view and hear this interview?
Well, support our military. I mean, we need them. They do a great job keeping us free. And so I don't think a lot of the American public understands how hard the men and women work doing what they do to keep us free. So support them in any way you can.
Is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
No, not really.
Is there anything you've always wanted to share about your service or veteran experience that you never have?
Well, no, I don't think so. In retrospect, it was a good 4 years of my life. Like I say, the time I was in Vietnam wasn't a good time to be in Vietnam. Now it's a tourist attraction. In the 60s it wasn't. But I met a lot of good people, got to see a lot of places I never would have seen. And like I say, it was good for me because I was a very immature 19-year-old at that time in my life. So it does help you grow up.
What would you like people to know or remember from your story?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I would guess if you're kind of lost in life, you might consider the military. It's a good lifestyle. And like I say, we need our military. So if your life isn't going quite right, you might consider a military service. It's very helpful in a lot of ways.
What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
Well, I was fortunate the 4 years I was in. Like I said, I never seen any combat. A lot of people weren't quite as fortunate, and they carry some pretty deep scars. A lot of people aren't aware that every day 22 veterans commit suicide. So they're carrying some pretty heavy burdens. So if there's any way you can help, please do.
Thank you. I guess, yeah.
You're very welcome.